We're going to talk about automate syndication and ownership of your content with Eleventy. It's not just Eleventy, there's other tools I'm using too, but at the end of the day, it's Eleventy that builds everything, which is a good thing. So let's get started here. Okay. So my name is Nick Taylor. I'm from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I recently started working as a staff engineer at Netlify on the ecosystem team, which is pretty awesome. I think we're still hiring some roles. I'm not sure. It's not a promo spot or anything, but I'm pretty sure we're hiring other people still. On social media and pretty much everywhere, I'm just Nicky T online. And you can see my Eleventy blog at iamdeveloper.com. I also stream on Twitch at livecoding.ca, and I'm not a big fan of spiders. Okay, so, and I'm also turning left a lot because my smaller screen is over here and I didn't have time to move it. So cool. So yeah, so what will we cover? I'm gonna go through the end product first. I'm gonna show you the blog and just a couple things in it. And I'll show you how I go about creating a blog post and then how it all kickstarts. And then I'm going to mention some of the pieces of the puzzle, which are the Dev2 API. I use some GitHub Actions to do some caching that Eleventy benefits from. I'm going to go through briefly short codes and a liquid tag connection and how I get that to work together. And then obviously it's all built with Eleventy at the end of the day. And yeah, and you can see the blogging workflow in action. I might end up doing that as we go through things, but we'll see how it goes. So, all right, so let's take a peek at all this. Let's see the end product first. So the end product is my blog. We just go to iamdeveloper.com. And I'm just going to zoom in here a bit. This is, for context, I am not a designer. I took a template from Andy Bell, the Helia template, and I have modified it. But I went with this because it's got great Lighthouse score and it's completely accessible. And the changes I have made are still accessible. So that deploys to Fly with Eleventy. And some things I have here that I'll explain how I end up building them is I have like this boost on dev button. So if you click there, it goes to the associated article because I have a canonical URL that I set in Dev2. You can do this on other platforms too, like Hashnode and probably many others. So I have buttons for both of those. And then that's the content basically. And if we just come back here, we're just going to look at the Dev2 API basis really briefly because we're not going to talk about this too much. So the Dev2 API is a Rails app in case folks aren't aware. And so there's a REST API built in there. And you can check out the documentation if you go to developers.forum.com/API. I'm just going to show the page here real briefly. So you can do all kinds of things. You can get articles, you can create articles, et cetera, et cetera. For my purposes right now with the workflow I use, I write my blog posts on Dev2. I use it as a, I guess, air quote, faux CMS, headless CMS. I don't know if pulling data from other blogging platforms would be considered a headless CMS. I mean, it's still delivering content, so I don't know, loosely in the sense it's headless CMS maybe. So typically what I do, and we're going to go through the workflow. So I'm going to create a post here and I'm just going to say my Eleventy meetup talk, and I don't know how to spell. All right, and I'll just add some tags. So let's just say, oh, there isn't an Eleventy. I will have to speak to the Dev2 folks to create one. So we can add that. And I don't know, we'll say like front end maybe. And I'll just say, hey, friends watching the stream. And there's other things you can do. You can create your canonical URL. I don't have the actual page in my site yet, so I don't have the canonical URL, but there's a pattern I use, so I could put it in. But for now, I'm just going to publish this. And so this is my new talk. It's published. It's live on Dev2. Now, what's going to happen at this point is if we keep moving on here, and before I move on, I'll just mention, if you are using the Dev2 API, depending on what you're doing, you might need a API key. So if you go to your settings into your account, in here below, there's a place where you can generate an API key. I'm not going to show mine. They're using the details tag, thank God. So you don't see mine, but you can come here and you can create one, and then there's instructions in the Dev2 API documentation on what to do there. So now if let me just go to GitHub while that's going on. Okay, so let's talk about GitHub Actions briefly. You can do this in many ways. I just happen to use GitHub Actions because I'm on GitHub. GitHub Actions are great because you can pretty much do anything with them. You can run scripts. You could, there's all basically anything you can think of, you can probably do. And one of the cool things about this is they're composable, so you can use existing actions. So for example, like checkout code from Git and so on. So you can stack those all together. And let's come back here. I also didn't time this talk, but anyways. So if we come to my blog for a second here, it's all open source. I have some actions here, and the action, if we just come take a peek at it real quick, okay, you can see here, if I go to one that ran before, if you haven't seen GitHub Actions before, I've got or used them, there's a resource I left at the end of the talk that you can check out. Essentially, it runs through certain things. And in my case, the big thing that I'm doing is I'm getting new blog posts and videos. And what I'm doing is I'm using the Dev2 API to pull in that information for any blog. Basically, I'm getting all my blog posts. And the reason why I'm getting all blog posts is I could probably, be more granular, like maybe check the published dates or the updated dates. But for now, I just kept it simple. And what I do is I have all these blog posts stored in my repo, because to give a bit of context, when I used to do this, Dev2 had an integration with StackBit, which would do kind of what I'm doing now, but that got phased out. So for about a month, I was literally copy pasting Markdown into my blog and then publishing it, which is not an ideal workflow. So all the pages that I pull from Dev, my blog posts, they're in my post folder as Markdown that I generate. I'm not going to go into the scripts that I use really, but they're all in there available. But essentially what it does is it pulls the Markdown, and then if there's any updates to a particular file, it'll commit it. If it's a new file, it gets added. And the reason why I'm doing this in here, because I could do this all within when I go to build Eleventy, but it's not something that needs to be done all the time. And so what I do is I just have a daily task that runs and says, go get me the latest blog posts. And if there are any changes, because it is possible that there's days where a lot of days there just isn't, it will not do anything. But if there are, it commits the changes. And I deploy things to Netlify. Even before I was working there, I was deployed to Netlify. And so when you push changes to the main branch, it kicks off a deploy. And so that's what I call it's air quote caching. Cachings can be many things, but I'm using the file system to cache a lot of these things, because I used to rebuild all these things all the time. And even the old integration I had with StackBit, I believe that's what it did as well. So it meant longer build times. And even though, I don't know, I think I probably got about 200, maybe not 200 blog posts. I forget how many I have in my actual blog, because it's not the same as in Dev, but my builds used to take almost 5 minutes, which is bananas. And now the build takes 15 seconds. That's also thanks to a lot of work that Zach's done on Eleventy, because I'm running the latest Canary as well. But just, not doing work that you don't need to do all the time, it definitely shaves off a lot of time. So that's my caching secret to some degree. And we can take a peek at things here. If we go to the raw, when I was doing this before with Markdown, it was using the YAML syntax for the front matter. And I found when I started to integrate with the Dev2 API, for me, it was a lot easier instead of jumping through hoops to convert it all to YAML. Maybe there is something that does it automatically, but I just found it was better to go the JSON route, and I could pop stuff in there and I can tweak things as I need. So that's my caching layer. And if we come here, let's talk a bit about short codes and the liquid tag connection. So if we come back here for a second, if we look, you'll see here, this is the Markdown that comes from let me zoom that in, from the Dev2 API. So the Markdown, if I go to this page on Dev2, is going to have a Twitter liquid tag here. When I'm using nunchucks in Eleventy, so you have short codes there. It's the same syntax pretty much. There's a couple, there's some things you have to change, but what I do is all the liquid tags I'm using on Dev2, I've created a short code that accommodates that when it comes in and when I build it with Eleventy. And there's some things in there that I got smart about too. Like, for example, I used to have a Twitter embed coming in. Now I just generate that markup and then I cache it instead of having to build it all the time. A lot of it's really just, if there's things that are never going to change, I'm going to persist it to the file system. Yeah. So, and if we go to, I can show you basically the liquid tags here. So if we go to shortcodes, so I have a bunch in here, and I actually, there's one for GitHub, and I actually found a project that I don't know if it was Zach that created it or not, but basically using Open Graph Eleventy.dev, I was able to just make a nice social card for the GitHub repo, because the way a lot of the stuff that comes in from Dev2, it's iframes when they're embeds, which isn't that great. And I had to jump through some hoops to even get the iframes to load properly. And, you have to add the loading lazy. There's a bunch of things. And when I discovered this was just a nicer solution. And I just have a few other short codes like that. There's even some embedded ones I do for like articles. So like if I come back to here, for example, we go to, let's go to the latest one here. So this is a Dev2 article that my coworker Salma wrote, but when I pull it in, I have a short code that generates it to look like this. So that's just an example. And then here you can see the social cards. I have things zoomed in, but this is like the Dino and Remix social cards for the repo. So that's that. It's kind of a whirlwind tour of everything. So I could probably go into a lot more detail, but so you can see how this is just me showing how I'm pulling in some of these liquid tags, and then I'm calling code, which is the short codes, to create the proper rendered markup in Eleventy. Okay. And of course, it's all built with Eleventy. I'm not talking so much about Eleventy now. I know it's Eleventy meetup, but at the end of the day, Eleventy consumes all these things and just ends up building super fast, and just having stuff like the caching and so on just makes these things a lot easier. So what I want to show you now is, there you go, Canary 11 shout out. What I want to do now is, so there's that blog post that I put on Dev2. If we go there for a second, and okay, no, okay, nobody's liked it yet. That's okay. So at this point, I'm like, okay, how does this get into my blog now? As I mentioned before, there's a GitHub action that runs, but it runs, I believe right now it's running at 8 p.m. my time every day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate that, and I'm going to run it myself. And so I'm just going to run the workflow. It does fail sometimes. It's something that I'll sort out at some point. But I'm just going to let it run here, and we'll just give it a minute. And while that's going on, okay, you can see the workflow started here, and it's going to pull in things. It's going to check out the code and so on. That's just installing some node modules, I believe. And so it's going to run. And then I'm just going to take this off screen for a second, because I think I'm logged into Netlify with my work account at the moment. Okay, that's the error I get occasionally. I'm going to rerun it, watch it not work for a demo, but let's try that again. Rerun. If it doesn't work for some reason, I will definitely, I'll just show you what happens. Just a sec here. I got my one password talking to me here. Okay, so it's running the job. I'm hoping it'll pass this time, because it's nice if you see the actual thing succeed, but if it doesn't, that's okay. I can show you existing runs. Okay, just give that a second. And the thing with the GitHub Actions too is I'm on open source. I don't know if you have some kind of paid plan, if they run faster. Sometimes they don't start right away, but let's bring this over. Okay. Okay, so it was successful. So now if I come back to the code, you're going to see it was automatically committed, and it said update blog posts and videos. So I'll just zoom this in a bit. And you're going to see here's that. Okay, I made some changes somewhere else, I guess. Oh yeah, that's pulling in latest videos as well. That's something else. But you can see here, my Eleventy meetup talk got pulled in. And now if you come over here, you're going to see that it's actually building on Netlify now. And I can zoom that in a bit too. And like I mentioned, when I push to the, when things get committed to main, it just starts deploying on Netlify. and I don't know. I'm still boggled, but like how my build times just shrunk immensely because like I was paying for some build minutes sometimes too. But if we see at the end here, okay, that's running Lighthouse. But you see here it ran in 17.2 seconds. The on post build stuff's just Lighthouse. But if we come here now, it should be here soon. All right, that looks all right. That's good. And if I give it a oh, there you go. And then my Eleventy meetup talk is there. Not much in there, but hey, friends in the stream. So that's kind of the workflow. I've found it very useful because I like Dev2. I used to work there too, but I like it as a blogging platform, and I didn't want to have to just do this in multiple places. So this is kind of the route I took to be able to air quote syndicate somewhat. Right now I'm manually importing some stuff to Hashnode as well, but they do have an API as well. And I'm thinking of at some point, being able to publish to there as well. So then it's all pretty seamless. The other things I'd probably mention just about some of the logic here is like I have a short code here to create these boost links. And what I do is when the markdown gets created, it's using the same slug as the one that gets generated from Dev2. So I know as long as the rest of the URL is a certain thing, it'll match up. So that's kind of what I do. And I cache those things as well. So if we come here real quickly, source data. Okay, so here's some other things I do, like that post I showed you about Salma that was embedded in my recent blog post. I cache some of that stuff in here too, so I don't have to get these things again because those rarely change unless somebody updates something, like changes the title or whatever. Some other things are, even though I'm posting to Hashnode manually right now, I'm switching the slugs to the same one as I have on Dev2 and in my blog. So that's how I'm able to create those boost links, pull my RSS feed from Hashnode, and I read the slugs out of there. And that's how I'm able to map those boost buttons as well. So it's not a perfect workflow, but it's been working pretty well for me right now in terms of just being able to put my content out in more than one spot. And you could conceivably post it to many other spots too. It's just, these are the two I generally publish to and Hashnode. So that's kind of the workflow, like I said, I'm super happy with it. And I've been super happy with Eleventy since I started using it I think it's been like maybe almost 2 years now. I can't remember. So if we just come back to the slides for a sec, we did that. We did the magic. So here's just some resources, nothing much here, but the GitHub Actions docs, the Dev2 API docs. If you're interested in looking at the Hylia template from Andy Bell, I've linked to that as well as Andy Bell. I've never met him in person, but he's just phenomenal designer and front end. And of course, Eleventy, which we all love. I did not have a picture of a possum, but if you want to check out the slide deck, I think CL will make it available, but you can go grab it at imdeveloper.com/Eleventy meetup May 22. And that's pretty much it, unless there's some questions.
I think a few folks had questions. Yeah, y'all can speak up now. It looks like Stephanie asked, have you considered spinning out a starter with the essential Dev Actions Eleventy flow?
Yeah, I definitely could do something like that. It's just been more a question of finding time to do it.
Yeah.
This whole new workflow I had a few weeks off before I started working at Netlify. And I was like, this is like when I was like, I'm doing this now. So I put the blinders on and did this whole thing. But it could definitely become some kind of starter site for sure. I probably wouldn't. I mean, I guess I could link maybe Andy's starter site, but it could be any Eleventy site. Or I almost even wonder too if this could somehow get bootstrapped another way. I know there's plugins in Eleventy, but that's something different. But I'm wondering if there's a way for folks that could just say like, this is what my starter site is like, and then pull in the stuff that does this automation. So I'd have to think about it. But yeah, it would definitely be something that I'd love to do if I had time to, and or if, because it's all open source, if folks were interested in that. Definitely would be happy to collaborate with people if I don't have enough time to do it myself.
Awesome. And then I had a question sort of related.
Yeah.
Since you worked with the dev team before, do you
Yeah.
know, so like with web mentions, it feels like dev is a really good candidate for it, but I feel like the API was never fully documented out for that. So it's like adding it to like Bridgie and stuff. So you could like collect all your web mentions and show them on the canonical link also, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't work on the web mentions part. I'm trying to remember if it was my old coworker Michael or not. And I think there was some community contributions to that too. I actually don't know what state it's in, but I could definitely find out. I have a ear to ground at Dev2 still, so I speak to them pretty frequently. So
Cool.
yeah.
Oh, and Oscar asked us if your repo is open source. Y'all can also ask your own questions. I'm just reading from the chat.
Yeah. And like I said, it is all open source. You can literally just go to my github.com/NikkiT online and it's in there. It's all MIT. I don't know how that works with content because like, yes, the source code is, but please don't steal my blog posts.
Oh, I think I wrote something like that in mine also. Because yeah, it's kind of weird, right?
Yeah, I mean, the history is in there now, but I think conceivably if you wanted to, have your stuff private, like your blog posts, what you could do is still have the entire workflow I have, but when you're going to get the content, you could, all that caching I do, you could do that in a private repo that the GitHub action could have access to, probably something like that. So then like the whole project is still open source, but your actual content is like the markdown files and whatever else you cache, that could be private. So that's definitely doable for sure. And like I was saying too, I'm using the GitHub Actions, but you can use other things like, I'm not trying to promote Netlify here, but we do have scheduled functions, which you could probably do some of that stuff in. The reason why I went with GitHub Actions is there's a huge eco. Yeah, Netlify is okay, Zach. The reason why I went with GitHub Actions is I had worked with them previously, and also there's a huge ecosystem. There's a lot of things you can do there. There's like even it's out of the scope of what we're talking about here, but if you check my README on GitHub, I use GitHub Actions to pull in like latest blog posts there, as well as like updating streaming content I do, and that's all through GitHub Actions. And I grabbed one that's open source, so open source for the win as always. So there's a lot of things I'm interested in doing still too. Like I'd spoken to Ben Holmes, who's now at Astro, but he had worked on the Slinkity plugin. That looks really interesting. I have to take a look at the plugins because I don't know how new that is in Eleventy, but I do like the ergonomics of JSX, and it would be kind of interesting to pull in React components. But honestly, with the workflow I have right now, it's just not necessary. Like I'm pulling raw markdown from Dev2. If I were to do that, it would just be really me just saying I'm a dev and I want to do it, which, overcomplicate my life for no reason. So, yeah.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much. You got lots of claps in the chat, BT Devs.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Well, thank you, everybody.
So